I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Actually, don't close your eyes. You're listening to this, so keep them open, keep driving, keep folding your laundry, keep doing whatever you're doing right now. But I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're standing in a hospital hallway. The floors are that particular shade of pale green that hospitals always seem to choose, like someone decided years ago that pale green was a calming color and no one has questioned it since. You're standing there because your husband has been in a car accident. Not a terrible one, he's going to be fine, the doctor already told you that, but bad enough that he's unconscious, bad enough that someone called you from his phone. You've been sitting in that waiting room for 2 hours. You're still in the clothes you were wearing when you got the call, a blue cardigan, jeans, one sock inside out because you dressed so fast you didn't notice. You haven't cried yet because you're past crying, you're in that cold clear place that comes after the first wave of fear, when you're just waiting. And then a woman walks through the hospital doors. She's about your age. Maybe a year or two younger. She has dark hair pulled back and she's clearly been crying, and she's walking with the particular urgency of someone who has just heard that someone they love is hurt. She walks up to the front desk. You're close enough to hear her. She says, "I'm here for Daniel Marsh. He was brought in about 2 hours ago. I'm his wife." You stand very still. Because your name is also Mrs. Marsh. And you have been Daniel's wife for 11 years. My name is Susan. I'm 44 years old. I live in a house in Columbus, Ohio that I chose myself and painted myself and filled with things I love, and I have a dog named Pepper and a job I'm good at and friends who know my whole story now, which is a thing I used to think would never be possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because none of what happened in that hospital hallway makes any sense without the 11 years that came before it. I met Daniel Marsh when I was 28 years old, at a work conference in Indianapolis. He was 31. He sold commercial insurance, which sounds boring, but he talked about it in a way that made it sound almost interesting, which I later understood was one of his great gifts. He could make anything sound like something worth paying attention to. He was tall. He had this way of listening to you that made you feel like you were the most interesting person he'd ever met. I know that sounds like a cliché, but I'm telling you, when Daniel gave you his attention, it felt like a spotlight. Warm and bright and entirely focused on you. We dated long distance for 8 months. He was in Columbus, I was in Cincinnati. Every other weekend, one of us drove. I thought this was romantic. I thought the distance meant something, that he was choosing me, deliberately, across miles, and that meant the choosing was real. He proposed on a Sunday morning in March. We were in my kitchen, eating toast, and he just looked at me and said, "I think we should get married." Not on one knee, no ring yet, just those 6 words over toast. And I thought, this is exactly right. This is exactly the kind of man he is. No performance. Just honest. We got married 6 months later. Small ceremony, 30 people, my mother crying, his parents driving up from Kentucky. His father gave a toast that made everyone laugh. His mother hugged me for a long time and whispered, "Take care of him." I said I would. I meant it. Here is what Daniel was like, as a husband. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because none of what happened in that hospital hallway makes any sense without the 11 years that came before it. I met Daniel Marsh when I was 28 years old, at a work conference in Indianapolis. He was 31. He was present, but not always. He traveled for work, too, sometimes 3 times a month. Sales territory covered 6 states, he said, and the accounts required FaceTime. I understood this. I had my own career, my own rhythms. I wasn't the kind of wife who needed her husband home every night. He was affectionate, but with limits I never quite understood. Sometimes he was warm in a way that felt endless, Sundays in bed, long dinners, the way he'd reach for my hand in movies even after 10 years. And sometimes there was a wall. Not cold, exactly. Just, elsewhere. And when I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd say no, just tired, just work stress, and I'd believe him because I didn't have any reason not to. He had a separate bank account. He'd had it before we married, and we'd agreed to keep it. He used it for work expenses, he said, because the reimbursement process was easier if personal and business finances were separate. We had a joint account for the household. This arrangement had always seemed reasonable. He was private about his phone. Not paranoid private, he didn't hide it, didn't turn it face down, didn't leave the room to take calls. But he had a passcode I didn't know, which I'd never asked for because I'm not that kind of person. I trusted him. I had always trusted him. He was gone, on average, 12 days a month. I want you to remember that number. 12 days a month, for 11 years, is 1,584 days. That is 4 years and 4 months of my marriage during which my husband was, as I now know, living an entirely different life. The thing I want you to understand, the thing that took me the longest to understand about myself, is that I was not stupid. I was trusting. There's a difference. I was a woman who had built a marriage on the belief that the person she loved was who he said he was, and that belief was not naivety. It was faith. And faith, extended to someone who is deliberately deceiving you, looks like stupidity from the outside. But from the inside it just feels like love. I want to say that for anyone listening to this who has been in a similar place. You were not stupid. You were faithful. And there is nothing wrong with that, even if it was taken advantage of. Okay. Back to the hospital. Her name, I would learn later, was Patricia. But in that first moment, standing in that hospital hallway in my inside-out sock, I didn't know her name. I just knew what she had said to the woman at the front desk. I'm his wife. The receptionist looked at her and then looked at me, because I was standing right there, close enough that she must have realized I'd heard, and I saw the exact moment she understood what was happening. Her face went very carefully neutral, the way faces do when people who work in hospitals have seen enough of human life to know that sometimes two women show up for the same man and the best thing you can do is stay out of it. Patricia hadn't noticed me yet. She was filling out a form, her head bent, her dark hair falling forward. I walked to the desk. I said, very quietly, I'm also his wife. Patricia looked up. We looked at each other. I have tried many times to describe what that moment felt like and I haven't found the right words yet. It wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't rage, not immediately. It was more like vertigo. Like the floor had tilted and I was trying to find something to hold on to, but every surface I reached for turned out to be made of something I couldn't grip. Patricia's face went through about 15 emotions in 5 seconds. Confusion first, then something like recognition, like a puzzle piece clicking into place that she hadn't known was missing, then a kind of horror that I recognized because it was the same horror I was feeling. She said, "How long?" I said, 11 years. She said, 9 for me. And we stood there in that hospital hallway for what felt like a very long time, two women who had built their lives on the same lie, and neither of us said anything, because what is there to say? The doctor came out about 20 minutes later. Daniel was stable. He had a concussion, 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist. He would need to stay overnight for observation. We could see him shortly, one at a time. The doctor looked between us uncertainly. Hospital protocol, I imagine, doesn't cover this particular situation. I said, she can go first. Patricia shook her head. No. You go. I don't want to go. We sat down. In the waiting room. Together. I know that sounds strange. But I think we were both in a kind of shock that made the strange thing feel like the only possible thing. There was nowhere else to go. There was nothing to do while we processed what had just happened. So we sat, 2 women in plastic hospital chairs, and somewhere behind us a television played a cooking show on mute, and after a while Patricia said, "Did you know? Any of it?" "No," I said. "Did you?" "No," she said. A pause. "He told me he traveled for work," I said. He told me the same thing. 12 days a month. She turned to look at me. 12 days, she said slowly. Exactly 12. And I understood then, with a clarity that was almost physical, like cold water, exactly how he'd done it. 12 days with me. 12 days with her. Clean rotation. 2 wives, 12 days each, and somewhere in there a few days of actual work travel to hold the story together. 11 years. He had done this for 11 years without being caught. Until today. Until a patch of ice on Route 40 and a guardrail and an ambulance, and 2 phones in his pocket, which I also learned later, and the paramedic who called the number labeled home on the first phone, and the hospital who called the number labeled home on the second. 2 phones. He had 2 phones. 12 days, 2 phones, 2 wives, 11 years. We talked for 3 hours in that waiting room. I want to tell you about Patricia, because I think she's important to this story in a way that goes beyond what Daniel did to us. She is a real person, or she would be, if this were a real story, and real people are complicated, and she was not what I expected. She was an elementary school teacher. 3rd grade, 7 and 8-year-olds, the age she said was her favorite because they still thought school was an adventure and hadn't yet learned to pretend otherwise. She had a younger sister in Phoenix. She liked to run, half marathons, she'd done 4 of them, and she'd tried to get Daniel to run with her and he'd always said he would and never had. He always said he would, I said. Did he do that with you too? With cooking lessons, I said. He was going to take a cooking class with me for 6 years. She laughed. It was a strange laugh, short and without humor, but a laugh. Did you want children? She asked. We tried, I said. It didn't happen. We talked about adoption. It never happened either. A pause. You? I have a son, she said. I turned to look at her. He's 6, she said. His name is Owen. The thing I felt in that moment, I'm going to be honest about this, was not simple. There was grief in it, because I had wanted children and it hadn't happened. There was anger, because Daniel had a child I didn't know about. There was something else, something harder to name, a kind of ache for this little boy named Owen who was 6 years old and whose entire understanding of who his father was about to shatter. Does Owen know his father? I asked. He adores him, Patricia said quietly. Daniel's a good father. I'll give him that. Whatever else he is. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, entirely. We didn't see Daniel that night. We made that decision together, which I think surprised both of us. Neither of us went in. We sat in that waiting room until visiting hours ended and then we exchanged phone numbers. I don't know why, it just seemed like the right thing, and we went to our separate cars and drove to our separate homes. I sat in my driveway for 45 minutes before I went inside. My house was exactly as I'd left it. Pepper was asleep on the couch. The dinner I'd been making when the call came was still on the stove, half finished. The kitchen smelled like garlic and a particular staleness of food that sat too long. I turned off the stove. I fed the dog. I sat at the kitchen table and I tried to think clearly. My husband had 2 lives. He had a wife and a home in Columbus. He had another wife and a home, I didn't even know where yet, and a 6-year-old son. He had done this for 9 years at minimum, 11 if you counted from our marriage. He had constructed an existence so divided and so maintained that 2 women had built entire lives without ever knowing the other one existed. The thing I kept coming back to, sitting at that kitchen table, was a very specific memory. 2 years ago, Daniel and I had renewed our vows. It had been a small thing, just the 2 of us, on our anniversary, at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date. He'd written something. He'd looked at me and said, I have never loved anyone the way I love you. You are the only thing I'm certain of. I had believed every word. I had cried. I cried again now, at my kitchen table, but for a very different reason. Patricia called me the next morning. I'd half expected not to hear from her, I think I'd half expected to wake up and find that the previous night had been some kind of shock-induced dream, but she called at 8:30 and I picked up immediately. She'd been to see a lawyer that morning. Already. 8:30 and she'd been to a lawyer. I understood then that Patricia processed things differently than I did. I sat with things, turned them over, waited until I understood them from every angle. Patricia moved. She was a runner, and she ran at problems the same way she ran at finish lines. She told me what the lawyer had said. There were legal complexities. Bigamy, and it was bigamy, the lawyer had used that word, and hearing it applied to my marriage felt like being doused in ice water, carried criminal penalties in Ohio. The marriages themselves were legally complicated, the later one was technically invalid, which had implications for Patricia and Owen that were different from my implications. I called my own lawyer that afternoon. What I learned, I was legally Daniel's wife. Patricia's marriage to him was not valid under the law, which meant she had fewer automatic protections than I did, which was deeply unfair given that she had a child and had known nothing more than I had. This is the thing that made me most angry. Not what Daniel had done to me, I could hold my own rage about that separately, but what he had done to Patricia and Owen by making their family legally precarious. Owen was 6. Owen had done nothing. And yet. Over the next week, Patricia and I talked every day. Sometimes twice. This probably sounds strange to you, I know it would have sounded strange to me, before. Two women whose husband had deceived them both, finding each other in the wreckage and talking, actually talking, comparing notes and sharing information and slowly, carefully starting to trust each other. But here is what I understood, Patricia was the only other person in the world who knew exactly what I was going through. Not approximately. Exactly. And that kind of exactness creates a bond that has nothing to do with whether you would have chosen each other under normal circumstances. By the end of the first week, we had made a decision. We were not going to fight each other. We were going to face Daniel together. Daniel came home from the hospital on a Thursday. He didn't know that I knew. He'd been told, by the hospital, I assume, or by some version of events he'd constructed in his head during his 2 days of recovery, that his wife had come to the hospital and then left without seeing him. One wife. He assumed that meant me. He came home with his arm in a brace and his ribs taped and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has had 2 days to think and has decided on his approach. He sat down at our kitchen table and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as practiced sorrow, and he started to speak. I said, "Patricia is in the driveway." He stopped. He went very still. I said, "She's going to come in now. And you're going to tell us everything. Not your version, not a managed version, everything. And then we're going to tell you what happens next." He said, and I want to remember his exact words because I've turned them over many times since, he said, "Susan, I can explain." I said, "You can't. But you can tell the truth. That's different." I went to the front door. I opened it. Patricia was standing on my porch, her hands in her pockets, her face carrying the same stillness mine had carried since that hospital hallway. She came inside. She sat down across from Daniel. And for the first time in our kitchen, in the house where I had lived my married life, the three of us were in the same room. I'm not going to give you every word of what was said that afternoon. Some of it doesn't belong to me to share, and some of it is still too raw, even now, to lay out in detail. But I'll tell you the shape of it. Daniel talked for a long time. He explained how it had started, Patricia first, then me, and then somehow, in the way that certain people rationalize impossible things, he had told himself that what he was doing was manageable. That he was maintaining 2 families, not destroying 2 people. That he loved us both, which he seemed to genuinely believe, and which is the most bewildering part of this whole story to me, that a person can compartmentalize so completely that they experience love in one compartment without the love in the other compartment being diminished. I don't understand it. I don't think I ever will. He cried. I'm going to tell you that because I think it matters, not because his tears changed anything, but because I want to be honest about the complexity of what I felt watching him cry. I had loved this man for 11 years. I had built a life with him. The part of me that had loved him didn't disappear in that kitchen. It just had nowhere to go. Patricia asked about Owen. That was the thing she needed to know most, what Daniel intended, what he was willing to provide, how he was going to be a father to his son from a situation that was now, irrevocably, in pieces. Daniel said he wanted to be there for Owen. Whatever happened between the adults, Owen was his son and he wanted to be there. Patricia said, "That's the only thing you've said in the last hour that matters." I said, "We've talked to lawyers. Both of us. We know our options and we know what we want. We're going to tell you now, and you're going to listen." He listened. The divorce took 14 months. Not because it was contested, Daniel didn't fight it, at least not seriously, but because the legal situation was genuinely complicated and because doing it right mattered more than doing it fast. Patricia and Owen received a financial settlement that the lawyers structured carefully to account for the fact that her marriage was not legally recognized. It wasn't everything she deserved. But it was real, and it was documented, and it gave her a foundation. I kept the house. I needed it, not for sentimental reasons, but because it was mine in a way that went beyond the legal. I had chosen every room in it. I was not going to leave. Daniel, and I want to be honest about this too, cooperated more than I expected. I think he understood, in the end, that there was nothing to fight for and everything to lose, and that the only decent thing left available to him was to not make it worse. He moved to Kentucky, near his parents. He is involved in Owen's life, which Patricia has allowed with conditions and documentation and the kind of careful boundaries that come from trust being completely destroyed and having to build something workable from the rubble. Patricia and I, this is the part that people always find most surprising, stayed in contact. We didn't become best friends. That's the version of this story that would be tidier, and I want to tell you the true version. We became something harder to name. We talked on the phone every few weeks for the first year. We met for coffee twice. We checked in on each other during the rough patches, the holidays, the anniversaries, the specific dates that hit differently when the person you shared them with turns out to have been somewhere else entirely. She ran a half marathon 8 months after everything happened. She texted me her finish time. I texted back, "You absolute machine." She sent back a laughing emoji and then, "Thank you for everything." I didn't know exactly what she meant. For being civil in the hospital. For not fighting her. For sharing information instead of treating her as an enemy. For sitting with her in that waiting room when we were both in shock and talking for 3 hours and exchanging phone numbers and calling our lawyers and deciding together that we were not going to destroy each other when there was already so much destruction. I texted back, "Same." Owen is 8 now, in my version of this story. He has no idea any of this happened, because he was 6 when it happened and 6-year-olds don't need to carry adult wreckage. Someday he will know more, in whatever way Patricia decides to tell him, at whatever age she decides he's ready. That's her decision and I trust her to make it carefully. Pepper is still on my couch. 7 years old now, arthritic in one hip, still convinced she is a lapdog despite being 53 pounds. She was with me through all of it, through the hospital and the kitchen and the lawyers and the long nights and the slow, strange process of rebuilding a life that had been built on something hollow. I'm 44. I have been divorced for 2 years. I have a job I am good at. I'm a grant writer for a nonprofit that does housing work, which is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds and which I love completely. I have friends who know my whole story, which is a thing I spent a long time thinking was impossible. Here's what I want to tell you, if you're listening to this because something similar has happened to you, or because you're afraid something similar might happen, or just because you needed to hear a story tonight about a woman who found out the worst possible thing and kept going. You will keep going. Not because it doesn't hurt. It hurts in ways I didn't have words for, and some of those ways still catch me off guard on ordinary Tuesdays. But you will keep going because keeping going is what people do, and because you are more than the lie someone told about you, And because the life you build after is yours in a way the life before never quite was. I was his wife for 11 years. And then I became my own.